There's got to be an owner, right? Somebody, because if there's not a clear owner or it's a whole bunch of people, it's, committees, and especially if it's one of those organizations that love to get to a consensus, and I hate one of those. I'm pro-dictatorship myself. Yeah. So I'm pro-dictatorship. In business, I think that is the way.
Here's what go-to-market teams are missing: proof. That's what I think of every morning when I fire up LinkedIn and scroll through boring manifestos and endless lukewarm takes. Opinions are cheap and proof is gold. I'm Mark Huber, and this is The Proof Point, a show from User Evidence that helps go-to-market teams find ideas, get frameworks, and swap tactics. Each episode includes an unfiltered discussion with the biggest names in B2B SaaS to help find the proof points that I'm in search of. You'll learn from sales, marketing, and customer success leaders in the trenches, where I ask them, seriously, what actually works for you? One of our guests actually told me this felt like we were having drinks at a bar and talking about work without all the BS. And that pretty much sums it up and why I'm so excited for this new show. Join us every other week for new episodes. Hot takes, always welcome. On today's episode of The Proof Point, we're all about target customer insights, and I brought on three people who know a whole lot more about this than I do. First up, somebody who probably doesn't need any introduction, Pep Laja, the founder and CEO of Winter. He's accomplished a lot in his career, and I always love talking to him. Next up, Victoria Sakal. She's head of growth at Wonder and taught me about a few types of research that I had no idea were a thing. And last, but definitely not least, Ryan Sorley. He's the VP of Win-Loss at Clue, and I could listen to him talk forever. He knows his stuff. Enjoy. So Pep, why do more like B2B companies not invest in gathering target customer insights?
You're right. It is a sad fact that less than 10% of companies do research on a quarterly basis or more frequently. But, those who do, their customers' willingness to pay is higher, funnel is more efficient, LTV to CAC is much higher, and the companies typically grow at a 50 to 20% higher rate because they make better decisions. Executives at companies make decisions, small and big, and it might be, launching a new website, going after a new ICP, launching a new product, what have you. But if you just ship things without research, without pre-testing, the odds of running in the wrong direction are very high. And there's really nothing worse than running enthusiastically in the wrong direction. You'll pay a lot of stupid tax. And so, yes, shipping things fast is progress. Decision-making is progress. And I'm all for optimizing for speed and moving faster. But getting more speed by cutting out market research reduces the quality of information. And the quality of your decisions comes from the quality of your information. Basically, with less intel, you'll make more bad decisions. And marketers and execs, of course, don't want to make bad decisions. So, why cut research? So I believe that there's an old lingering idea that it takes forever. And it's true. Indeed, it used to be crazy slow. Traditionally, let's do some research, meant delaying stuff for weeks or months. And if you did multiple research projects per year, it was hard to get anything out the door. And so, but I think how things have changed is that, yes, you don't want to do that old clunky research that takes forever and slows down the speed of shipping. What you want to do is you want to optimize for the speed of insights. You should basically forget about research that takes months, unless we're talking about irreversible one-way door kind of situations. But investing a day or two to get intel from your target market, basically it significantly lowers the stupid tax you'll have to pay. And if you're consistently less wrong than your competitors, you'll make faster progress. So in conclusion, I think busting your ass and shipping the wrong campaign, wrong product, and wrong messaging isn't a strong shipping culture. It's a strong waste of time.
Did you come up with the stupid tax? Because I might have to steal that.
It's actually from one of my most favorite business books called The Road Less Stupid.
I am definitely stealing that. So Victoria, what do you think of that?
Interesting, because we call it the slightly more politically correct research tax, where I like the provocation of stupid tax. But first, the short answer is I totally agree. I think and I'll say, having come from Kantar, which was one of the big very slow, very expensive vendors. The white space we saw, I literally moved from New York to SF because all of these B2B SaaS scrappy growth companies needed a way to get insights. And there was just this major gap between the budget and even the culture, let alone the pace and the lifestyle and work speed of these big companies. There needed to be something that filled the gap. And now there are all these solutions in the middle, and we'll probably get into probably the other extreme of quality and efficiency with AI. And like, will you get fake respondents giving you better quality data than these big month-long projects? I have an opinion, juries may be out there, but in short, yeah, I mean, everybody is needing some sort of insight. And the reality is people are either not asking questions, they're using either instinct or some hippo's opinion or last quarter's random data point to make a decision.
So Ryan, when you hear the term target customer insights, how do you define it? What's the first thing that comes to mind?
Yeah, I think when I think about target customer insights, or from my perspective, buyer insights, it really has to do with the objectives of the program owner, what it is that they're trying to learn through the effort. So for buyer insights, it might be competitive intelligence focused, or maybe they're trying to understand key selection criteria of the organizations that they're selling to. On the customer side, we do a lot of churn research. So there's a lot of specific objectives related to why an organization decided to move on, what the customer experience was like. Did the onboarding process go well? Did they get what they wanted out of the relationship based on what was sold to them? So for us, it's not casting the wide net and just asking random questions, but it's going in with a specific hypothesis that you're looking to prove or disprove. That's how I would describe it.
I think that it's basically a subset of market research. Like, market research can mean very broad things. So target customer insights is like, we are focused on a very specific customer segment, one we're trying to market to, sell to, and we're focused on a very specific goal, something that we're trying to figure out. And it's usually about what they think, what they need, what they want, the problems, the hot priorities, things going on in their companies, and what do they think about us in particular, maybe. And it's also mainly qualitative, less quant. It's not about TAM and is the general category growing by X% per year and how many billions. It's about what is a big pain and how do they go about solving this and what triggers them and where do they go look for solutions. And if they want to buy a software, what does it look like on the inside? And then who comes to mind as like a top vendor or like top three, and brand preference, brand awareness, these kind of things.
Let me just ask you a clarifying question on that, because there's the word insights here, right? And I think that there's a lot of people who get confused by intel and like summarizing data versus actually having an insight. So Pep, how would you describe what an insight is in your world?
Well, there's data, which is passive, that's what you gather through a survey or whatever. And then as you go through the data, you might develop an insight. So insight is basically, so what? The data is the what, insight is the so what, and which would be followed by now what, some sort of an action.
That aligns.
The way that we think about it here, because the perspective had to expand a little bit when you think about desk research as well, which is the space that I play in. So I think a lot about how these pieces may or may not interplay. And to your point, Ryan, intel is sort of, you almost think about it in the different cadences that you might get insights. You can like have a question and you go find an answer where you need your objective. You have a hypothesis that you're trying to test or validate or disprove. There's a monitoring motion where you're always tracking certain things. You don't know if there's a there. You don't necessarily have a pointed question, but there is a couple of things that whether it's around how they buy or what they say or words they use or why they're going to a competitor. And then there's these big landscapes. So like kind of paint the picture for me. There might be pointed questions within that, but like paint all of the things around who they are, what they care about, influences on them, the channels they're using. And then within that, all these three intersect. So you might like double click into something to go ask a pointed question, run a research study, collect data, and just pull the insights from. You might decide, we just discovered in this landscape that there's a new emerging type of category that our competitors are emerging in, and we, our buyers are going to. And so we want to monitor that and then maybe go and run a study and surface insights that we make decisions based on. But it's a good distinction in that there's an always on intelligence. And then there's the what that comes out of it that you then base decisions on. Then there's the whole complexity of who gets that insight? Is it some stakeholder, some team? And how do you make sure they actually see it, understand it, action on it, and then provide the feedback loop, which is sort of the long tail of it. But it's an important distinction with the two.
And then the follow-up question is on the action side, right? So we've collected data, we've looked across the data set, we've surfaced insights that lead to those actions. How have you seen people manage the action part of the process? I know there's things like RACIs that people use to be able to capture, track, assign. But what are the best practices that you both have seen in actually driving change with the data that you've collected, with the insights that you've generated?
There's got to be an owner, right? Somebody, because if there's not a clear owner or it's a whole bunch of people, it's, committees, and especially if it's one of those organizations that love to get to a consensus, and I hate one of those. I'm pro dictatorship myself. Somebody that can just,
Let's not get
it's fine
into
to disagree,
political
but we need to.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm pro dictatorship in business. I think that is the way. Otherwise, decision making is progress. Even if it's the suboptimal decision, you will learn through market feedback. Now that we did something. Right? You cannot stand still. The worst thing is we get a bunch of data. Let's say, how is our messaging resonating with our target customers? Do they get it? Do they want it? And then it's we come to an impasse. This ICP gets it and this doesn't. And so, and everybody has different, that's the death, I think. So ownership.
So Victoria, you said something that I had not heard of until I think you mentioned it to me over email a few weeks back. And I'm by no means a research expert, but desk research, what is desk research? I'd never heard of that before.
Yeah, the premise effectively breaks down into, and maybe taking a step back, there's three types of big, broad buckets of data and insights you might use in your organization. There's internal data. What are we seeing from our sales calls, from our product analytics, from what our, the field is telling us? That's all kind of internal owned data. Even, who's clicking on what campaigns and what videos are they watching on YouTube that tell us messaging doesn't resonate. The second bucket is primary research. So that's where Winter would play, and you can go and do qualitative research, quantitative, a whole number of different solutions there. The third bucket is desk or secondary research, which is there's information out there already. It is almost by definition not going to be a perfect answer to whatever the thing you're exploring is. And this is where the conversation right now is really interesting with AI, and that if you're asking AI a question for an innovative strategy and it gives you an answer, it almost by definition means somebody has done the thing or somebody has already explored the topic. And so you need to think of a new angle on it if you're actually trying to be innovative and different. But the premise of desk or secondary research is there are known knowns, there are pieces of information out there that can be a very powerful foundation that help your primary go further, because you're starting at step 3 instead of step 0. And I don't know anything about this space. If you've canvassed or landscaped everything around a competitor or what people are saying and how they're talking about a different topic, then you can start from a different level of context, but also just a different, level of sophistication on the conversation. So desk research at its core is just information that's out there that's publicly available that you can gather. But this, to Pep's initial point, the research tack and the amount of effort that you're having to put in to sit on Google.
So Ryan, I'm trying to not take the easy way out by ignoring the original question that you put me on the hook for, which is how I define target customer insight. So I think for me, without thinking through any of the answers that you all gave, it's really just going in and trying to get feedback on a specific objective or hypothesis that you are trying to prove out from the people that you care about. Not just a broad group of people that could be your, entire addressable market, but it's really narrowing it on who are the best fit customers whose opinions you actually care about.
That's a really good point. And one of the things that I think a lot of people don't do is think about segmentation when collecting data or create research cohorts. They just cast a wide net and they get a certain sample size, but they don't recognize the difference between, this respondent and that respondent, and they mix it together and they come up with more bad data. I love the fact that you pointed out that you go after a specific group. and go deep within that group. That's what we would recommend all day, every day.
So I'm curious to hear everybody's perspective with this conversation around target customer. We're starting with the assumption that people know who their target is, which sophisticated companies will. Part of what we're talking about is people haven't even done this type of research. So have you really defined a great target? How do you think, or, for your own function or advise your, customers, how do you advise them going from there's a market, here's how you do research on that market to figure out different segments of the market, and then you pick a segment based on intersecting, their need and their TAM and their value with what you're able to serve? Because there's an intersection of you'll probably accept people beyond your target customer and your solution, but going from who all this market broadly is.
The kind of research that, I think it depends on the kind of research that you're doing, right? And what the outcomes are that you're looking for, what problem you're looking to solve, what actions you're looking to take. In our world, we do a lot of interviews with buyers, win-loss research. So when we're working with organizations, they might want to focus on enterprise level deals in North America against this competitor. And they're pulling data, albeit crappy data, from their CRM system to try to identify who the right targets are to go after that cohort, to be able to answer questions about what's happening within that segment. So it's aligned with product, it's aligned with the sales team, the region, the competitor. So it's pretty easy with our particular type of research, not market research, it's primary research for organizations, for them to figure out who to go after based on the problems they're looking to solve.
It is also my experience that mostly companies have an idea of who the ICPs might be. It's not like, I have no idea. I mean, maybe if you haven't sold anything, you have actually no idea. But usually you have sold something. So, but the question might be, well, out of these 4 or whatever, I don't know which one is the best fit for who has the biggest problem that we solve. Like there you can do exploratory research where you conduct a survey or whatever the chosen mechanism with those 4 type of personas. So it's like 4 side-by-side studies, and then you can compare, hey, like ICP 1 really cares about this problem, willingness to pay is very high, they're like, give me this tomorrow, and ICP number 4 is like, meh, not a problem, I don't care about it,
Yeah, and I think for me, I mean, pulling from experience now and then other companies that I've been at, I feel like we've always had a hypothesis around what our ICP is. Now, whether or not that's the right ICP, I think is another podcast episode, but there are ways to still get feedback from the people that you think you care about or whose opinion matters to you. Like Pep said, if you haven't sold anything yet, then I'm probably not the best guy to tell you what to do. But I think going in with a hypothesis of who you want to get feedback from is probably a good starting point.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. Practically speaking, when we went through our Q1 research exercise, interesting challenge is always, I think it was your point before, Ryan, the variables that you segment on, like what's too granular versus what is, for us, we think about innovators, which is a high level name for people who are in innovation strategy and otherwise. And the axis that we ultimately segment on is, what type of role they have and what kind of philosophical slant they have to the work that they do. Some people are like innovators, but they're just executors. Getting to that level of like, where is the active differentiating value? Sometimes it is job title based. Sometimes it's way more complicated than that. And I think that can sometimes trip people up, but at least having hypotheses to test and kind of angle messaging or strategies around is helpful.
I would add that when we're kind of running programs on a regular basis, we tend to start with the leadership team, try to align our research to the corporate objectives. So you're the head of product. What are you working on? What are your blind spots? How can we help fill those blind spots with information? The other thing is, I don't know if this totally aligns to what you said, but I think a lot of people get caught up on sample size. And what we have seen with traditional surveys, you need about 30 responses within a cohort, a segment, to be able to start to see trends emerge within the data set. And with qualitative interviews, it might be 10 to 15. And then you might start to hit this point of diminishing return. There's no science, it's more practical knowledge around those numbers. But it is important to point out because a lot of people just start with, I don't even know, is 10 responses good? Is 1,000? What should we be shooting for? Pep, I'd love to hear your perspective on kind of the point of diminishing returns as it relates to collecting data.
No, absolutely. And I think you said it's not science. It is actually science. This has been studied. There have been a lot of meta studies of looking at the sample size needed to when do you reach the point of saturation, meaning that you stop getting new insights. And it is around 15 people. That's enough to get insights. Now, to see trends, yes, you need more sample size, but you won't get any new insights. So I also see a lot of people that say, oh, I need a sample size of 1,000 people. Why do you need 1,000? Well, I read it in a blog post. Well, like sounds great, 1,000, but yeah, you don't need 1,000 people, or at least the cost benefit analysis would show that is not worth it to get to 1,000 people. It will cost a lot more money unless it's consumer research.
So this next question should be a fun one because this is not a pitch slap from anyone and myself included. So let's just think about how you can do this manually. But what are some of the ways that you go about collecting target customer insights in your roles and at your companies?
A pitch slap. I like that. I've heard that before.
Besides some of the obvious ways is you get on a phone call with them, you survey them, and
you say obvious though, but so many people don't even do that. It's kind of crazy.
It can be a big hassle. Interviews are very time consuming. Especially, hey, do you have 30 minutes to hop on a call with me? I get emails from Tegas and these other expert networks all the time, where they offering me $500 for an hour. I still don't take them. It's an hour is a lot to ask of people. So I also think we should trim down to ask to, hey, do you have 10 minutes? Because in 10 minutes, you can learn a lot. And if they're enjoying the conversation or a survey, they're probably willing to share more things, right? And you do need to incentivize them, either with money, Amazon gift cards, whatever it is. Another great source for me has for years been live chat. So prospects are coming. A lot of them don't know much about your company, your product, and they have very specific questions. And then you ask them, hey, well, why does this matter to you? Why is this important to you? And they'll tell you a lot. So, even though I'm the CEO of Winter, I do live chat every single day still because I'm just learning from target customers.
That's amazing. I didn't know that. Do you just have it up the whole time as you're working, or I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. I see all the threads. I have 2 full-time people whose job it is to talk to people, but I'm also in there. And in case, my mantra to live chat people is needs to be live every time. If it's takes more than a minute to get a response, it's not live, right? So I monitor if my people take more than a minute, I jump in. Not every day. Sometimes I got to do other stuff too, but often. And I find that, it's extremely rich information. People are usually anonymous and they feel very free to share.
Pap, I want to build on something that you said just from a different angle. You mentioned starting with a small 15-minute conversation. On the flip side, I think people get so overwhelmed with the amount of research they have to do that it's oh my God, this is a massive project. I don't have bandwidth for this. Find one hypothesis, one question, one gap in knowledge that you're trying to close. Start there, call it a 15-minute conversation with 10 people. That's how many? 3 business days. Break down the knowledge gap and the insights work that you have to do. And that'll also get momentum for us, when our CEO and head of product started to see these insights, they're give me more, and it builds the business case. But it also, it didn't feel as overwhelming to me to say I had this qual and quant and secondary and internal big project. I'm just biting one piece at a time. So just a actionable, practical tip.
In our world, we get people on the phone. We have about a 30% hit rate in our world, losses, B2B tech loss deals, and then about a 55 to 60% hit rate on the win side. These are warm leads. These are not cold. It's not cold outreach. It's not an expert network or a panel or anything like that. We tend to leverage the seller to make a warm introduction. So we're looking for where the relationship lives, whether it's a good relationship or bad relationship, it is a relationship. So we try to get an introduction and then we go down the path of recruitment from there. The thing that I'm really encouraging companies to think about today is actually softening the beach a little bit with these research candidates before you've actually reached out to them to set up a call. And in the win-loss world, it's having the seller actually bring up this feedback mechanism while they're still engaged with the buyer, while they're still friendly with them, while they're going through a POC or a demo or pricing. At that point, Like, hey, by the way, we really value feedback from folks like you. Would you be open just to share a few minutes with us after you've made the decision to work with us or work with somebody else? And they always say yes. And at that point, it's just a matter of following up and then scheduling the interview from there. I totally agree on the incentive side. We also offer charitable donations as an option because a lot of folks can't take cash or gift cards. But yeah, that's how we typically do it for the type of work that we're doing.
I want to comment on two things. So one, interviews are great, but they scale terribly. And so I'm a huge fan of surveys, like over interviews for this very reason, more people, less time. And two, what Victoria said is spot on. The scope of research, scale it down. Ideally, I feel like it shouldn't be like, oh, let's run a customer, whatever, target market survey. We need like 40 questions. I have 30 already. Like, do you have any more questions we can cram in here? Because like, we're only going to do this big project once, right? That's the old idea. Now it should be, right now, Mark and I were thinking about launching a new campaign. And we're like, I wonder if they care about this or that. Like, ooh, I don't know. Well, let's just do a one question research. We can launch it in the next 5 minutes, have the answers in by tomorrow, it's done. And we can make a great educated decisions about this one thing. And maybe 2 days from now, there's another one question. And then again.
I love the surveying bit. And then the one thing about surveying is just like being very intentional about who you're asking and when you are asking that specific question. Perfect example. If you're trying to understand why people went with your solution over, alternatives out there, if you're going to survey your entire customer base, some of who bought your tool like 2+ years ago, do you really think they're going to remember like why exactly they bought your tool? Maybe, probably not. So we try to send surveys like in the moment where they're most likely to provide feedback and provide contextual feedback too.
We have great data on the format of the response. So we offer people, hey, do you want to leave audio response, like just speak, or with video, or text, or live call? And it's like 90% prefer just writing it.
Interesting.
And it also makes it easier to analyze this data, So I think it's a win-win all around to do text first. I mean, offer options, sure, because on the phone typing is a bitch.
I think that's a really important point, because I think when a lot of people hear survey, they think of drop-down boxes and radio buttons, and that's not going to give you the story that you really want. So that qualitative approach to surveying, and now with the advent of AI interviewers and intelligent surveys, it's really interesting to see how that space will evolve over time, and how the traditional survey was okay, but these newer survey types are going to get the real meat that you're looking for. And they're kind of a hybrid, right, between what you would get from an interview and what you would get from a traditional survey. They've kind of met in the middle there.
Quant data, I feel like if you do a survey, hey, how important is this? So it's a 5.6, Like if you learn just quant metrics, our customer support satisfaction is 7.7. What do you do with this information? Like nothing. It's useless crap. You don't need benchmarks or anything.
People don't know that, though. People don't. It's really alarming. Like how many? Oh, I want a survey. Okay, well, tell me why. Because I don't know why. Like, well, what do you want to learn? I'm not sure. How do you want the survey structured? I have no idea. Like they have no clue, but they're like hell bent on the fact that they need a survey, and it frustrates me a bit.
At Winter, where you can launch surveys, there are templates you can use. 90% of our paying customers don't make any changes in any survey templates because they're afraid of making a mistake, whatever it is, like how to word and phrase a question. They're afraid. They know they need it, but how?
Yeah. I'm going to stop there. I'm not going to go on.
No, it sounds like you're getting fired up. Keep going.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, Pep, I'm not sure how Winter, with your response rates, I know you have more of a panel approach, but for traditional surveys where you're just kind of casting a wide net, the other piece is that your response rate is really shitty. It's like 2, 3, 10%. It's a typical. I know 10% is not a single digit, but it's typically a single digit response rate, and you kind of get what you get, and it's disappointing. I think a lot of people go into it with high hopes, and they're disappointed by the response. So if people could just like get smart about it and move towards like a Winter approach or a qualitative survey approach, they'd be much, much better for it. But I am the interview guy, and I think there's nothing better than an interview because you're able to really get the story behind the story that comes out of a qual survey and go deep and probe in different areas, which
Absolutely. Interviews are the best quality. I think there's no doubt about it. It's only the trade-off is the speed. If I, as a sole person, now need to interview 50 people, how long is that? It's going to take weeks and weeks and weeks and scheduling nightmares.
And I think that the between the quant and the qual also goes back to Pep, you mentioned before, and the insights as the what, but you actually need the so what and the now what. There's the why that qual reveals, which gives you like, what do I do with this information? What's happening? Again, that's where we find that desk research can be a good complement because the context wrapping around the data point, a lot of people are hesitant to use AI. And if you have that stat, it means nothing without the context of all these different reasons around hesitation or my company just won't let me or whatever. But the richness there is what gives the decision maker, again, to our conversation before, how do you make sure it actually gets actioned on? If they don't know what to do with it and why something's happening, it's like, thanks for the stat.
Yeah, executives do love benchmarks though. Like I've been on the soapbox, so I'm anti-benchmark, have been for a long, long time. Executives love it. Okay, I've stopped fighting them. Okay, sure, here's a benchmark. But combine it with qualitative, it actually gets their attention. So for instance, they're checking the clarity of their messaging. Does my target customer understand what we're pitching, right? And let's say they learn on a 5-point scale, it's 3.3, pretty bad. Now they are curious about the open-ended. Now they're like, oh, well, what about it is bad, right? If without that benchmark context, they might care less about the qualitative, right?
The big money question, you've got the insight. This has come up a couple times in this conversation, taking action on it. There's so many different factors in play here, but what do you do when you have this insight? How do you try and take action on it yourself? And how do you work with other teams to take action on the insights?
The question is, what kind of information are you generating? How actionable it is? How hard is it to action on? I think the key here is the planning that went into the research effort is really important because you should have some idea of the actions that you're thinking about taking once you have the data in your hands. The second piece is you have to have a committee to be able to review the data, prioritize what steps to take, assign owners to those steps, timelines. If you have a benchmark to start with, that's awesome because you can look at where you are today against where you are after you've made that change. But you have to have buy-in before you've started to collect the data. And you have to have a plan and a timeline for that committee coming together and making those decisions. And you have to have an owner of that committee. You have to have a lead that really is accountable for transforming those insights into actions and measuring the impact of those actions.
So I'll counterpoint that, Ryan, only because I am the one person in our organization where if I had a committee, it would be pulling my salesperson, my CEO, my head of product, and they're like, look, we got day jobs, you need to tell us. So just thinking of different listeners who might not have the luxury of, I totally agree with that approach. It's definitely recommended. But just to say, you then become the person who has to source all the objectives and that go into what are we trying to accomplish in this research. You then prioritize, well, we're only biting off this piece for now. With this information, here's my analytic plan, or here's my action plan and what we're going to do with this information, which should tie perfectly back to the knowledge gaps that we're trying to close because we need to do X, Y, Z is why we did the research. But I think the challenge then is how do you present the findings in a way like my CEO was thrilled to get a big Excel file with a bunch of tabs, but my other stakeholders might need the summary of the couple of bullets and here's one clip you might find really interesting. Here's a highlight reel of whatever else. So just to acknowledge that the challenge is sometimes you are the one person, but you need to know the stakeholder that you're managing and the information and the way they need to receive it in order to action on it. Gives you good influence because you're closest to the insight and you can surface what you feel is or finding is most important. But just to acknowledge it's not always unfortunately a team sport.
Yeah, I feel for you. I do. I'm speaking in general terms, and the terms are general related to the type of research that we do, which drives certain types of actions. But yeah, that's just for the win-loss stuff we're working on.
Research is not free. Right? It has a cost. And if you don't take action, it's just a cost. It will never become anything else. So it's kind of pointless to do it. So before you go and conduct that piece of research, you need to know the answer to the question, what will you do or change after you get this information? And if you're not sure, probably save the money. Don't do the research, right? So the research need to start from a business need, business question, and you want to take a decision. And so the answer influences the decision. So if you know this in advance, do the research. If you don't know what you're going to do with it, probably shouldn't do it.
But it's done every day like that, unfortunately.
I was just going to say, I feel like it's like, oh, we need to do research. Go do more research.
That's right.
What'd you find? It was like, I don't know. We just did more research.
And I need to do research. Yeah.
Well, Victoria earlier mentioned a concept of always on research, which I'm a big believer of as well, because always on research is it's like gathering some sort of intel, some sort of data, and it's maybe nobody is not every time not there like requesting, oh, I'm going to answer this question. So there are some other cases of how data is useful, even if it's always on and nobody like commissioned it. Like as an example, in B2B, we all often talk about alignment, customer success, sales, marketing, go-to-market teams, like in the CEO's office, and they might have different ideas what the ICP needs, wants, what we should do, which direction we should go, what should we launch or not. And so having this always on information come in, maybe it's a daily cadence, maybe it's a quarterly, whatever, some sort of information, insights come in to keep all the teams on the same page about ICP needs or like whatever that thing is we're interested in. It might still be usefulness of the data might be just alignment.
Still an objective though, right? At the end of the day.
Tab, I know we have both agreed and talked a lot about this, but there's also the principle of big R versus little r research, which is exactly what you're just articulating, that people get so encumbered by the big research project and the big initiative, and we've got to roll out the results. If it's this always on drumbeat of little r research, strategic insights, agile perspectives, and you're getting this, it also becomes easier to feed, when you're streaming with call recordings and you can pop in, on the channel and like, here's a key quote, somebody go listen, or tagging product. It becomes part of your rhythm instead of, all right, everybody sit down. We're going to roll out the results and click through all the slides and click through all the data sets. It just becomes a cultural shift as well.
Amen.
So we are basically at time, although I could keep going and listening for a while on this exact topic, but I appreciate all of you coming on the Proof Point. You schooled me here. This was great.
Awesome.
Our pleasure.
Thanks for having me.